Hello. Okay, we have made it through to Friday. So, 1 week done. Good work. Keep going. Okay, you're doing super. Episode number 3. Are we ready? So, we left it with the hints of trouble being caused by a wolf. So, Roz isn't overly settled by that situation. Okay, here we go. Chapter 22. The wolves, and you can see them. The attack happened at dusk, so just as it's getting dark. 7 beastly shapes bounded over the fence and into the pasture. Old Annabel, the cow, was wandering off from the herd, and now she made an easy target. The herding machine saw the wolves coming, and rolled in the right direction. But the hunters were clever. They split up, darted past the chunky machine, and surrounded their target. The wolf pack was led by a large male. His name was Shadow. Just sounds nasty. And it was easy to see why. He was quick and quiet and covered in dark fur, except for a long pale scar that streaked across his body like a comet. So this is obviously him at the front with his streak. Shadow locked eyes with the cow, distracting her with his fierce gaze. And when his pack was in position, he said, "Attack!" The wolves lunged, snapping their jaws at the cow's skinny legs. Annabel kicked and hollered, "Stay away from me, you brutes!" She was a big animal, but the wolves knew what to do. They kept biting her, kept taunting her, kept wearing her down. The herd watched from afar. They cried out to their friend. They wanted to help, but they were too frightened to move. Well, reader, you can guess who came to the rescue. Footsteps thundered across the pasture, and Roz leapt into the fight. Had she swung her fists or kicked her feet, the wolf pack might have fled. But the robot wasn't programmed to be violent. All she could do was awkwardly defend the cow. Roz felt teeth chomping her arm. She felt claws slashing her chest. Her pain sensors flared, and she howled, "Leave us alone!" The robot's booming voice startled the wolves, and in an instant she peered one of them away. Then Annabel landed a hard kick, and another wolf tumbled backwards into the grass. More help was coming. The other cows had finally found their courage, and the angry herd was on the march. The wolves had missed their chance. Shadow gave a frustrated grunt, and the pack retreated. They dashed through the pasture, leapt over the fence, and disappeared into the trees. The robot activated her headlights. The shaft of light beamed out from her eyes. While the herd crowded around Roz carefully examined Annabel's injuries. "I need to clean and dress these bite wounds," said the robot. "But you will be okay." "Of course I'll be okay," the cow panted. "I'm old, but I'm feisty. Those wolves don't scare me." Annabel talked tough, but there was no mistaking the fear in her eyes. All the cows were afraid. They knew that if the wolves attacked again, their next victim might not be so fortunate. Chapter 23. The Rifle. Oh. The wolves returned the very next morning. Shortly after dawn, they leapt from the trees and started chasing a poor calf through the pasture. Roz managed to drive them off, but that night they returned again. The herd came stampeding into the barns as the wolf laughed and trotted back to the fields. The cows were in shock. They refused to leave the barn. If this continued, the herd would produce less milk. Then the farm would lose money, and Mr. Sharif would send Roz back to the factory. Something had to be done. The dog barked and the children opened the door. "How'd you get all those scrapes?" said Jaya. "Is everything okay?" said Jad. I must speak with your father," said Roz. Mr. Sharif came to the door, and Roz explained the problem. At the first mention of the wolves, he sent his children down to their rooms, but the dog stayed. Oscar had no idea what the man and the robot were discussing, and his tail happily wagged as he stood beside them. However, his tail stopped wagging when Mr. Sharif handed Roz the rifle. The dog had seen this rifle in action, and it frightened him to the core. He scurried into the bushes and hid there, whimpering, while the conversation went on. "What do you mean you can't fire a rifle?" the man yelled. "Roz, you're a farmer now, and sometimes farmers have to kill animals." It was the first time Mr. Sharif had ever yelled at Roz, or maybe I should have done that a bit more aggressively. She waited patiently as words and spittle flew from his mouth. "My farm and my family are in danger. Roz, I order you to kill those wolves." "I cannot follow that order because I am not programmed to be violent." Mr. Sharif let out a heavy sigh. He knew Roz was right, but when he reached for the weapon, she couldn't let go. She wouldn't let go. The man stared at the robot stared at the dog stared at the rifle. Oscar was still whimpering and hiding in the bushes. Just the sight of the rifle had sent him into a panic. It was hard to believe that such a fearful animal was related to wolves. But dogs are related to wolves, thought the robot, and her computer brain began buzzing with activity. She thought of dogs and wolves and rifles. She thought of Shadow, the wolf leader, and the long, straight scar on his side. And then she had an idea. "Although I cannot fire the rifle," said Roz, "I believe it can help me solve the wolf problem." Mr. Sharif frowned. He didn't know what the robot was getting at, but he was happy to let her handle the wolves by herself. "Fine, try it your way," he said. "Just don't lose any cows or else we might have to lose a robot too." Chapter 24, The Bluff. Now, a bluff is like a bit of a lie or a bit of a trick. The cows peered out from the barn at Roz. The robot was holding a rifle. She carried it to the far side of the pasture and placed it by her feet. Then she began coating herself with mud and grass and probably a little cow dung. Every inch of her body was concealed as she nestled down into the ground and became part of the landscape. An ordinary clump of grass. You can just see her eyes. The cows were stunned. "What's Roz doing? Is she all right? Where'd she go?" Roz had learnt to camouflage herself back on the island, and now she was using that trick once again. She sat motionless for hours, waiting for the wolves to appear. Daylight faded, the stars came out, the moon climbed into the sky. But the wolves didn't show, so Roz tried something new. The robot was an excellent mimic, and she began to cry out in the sad voice of a wounded calf. "Please help me," she cried. "I have a hurt leg. I cannot move." But that's what an injured calf sounds like, I've just decided. Crickets chirped. "Please help me." An owl hooted. "I cannot move." The calf's voice continued crying out. Finally, as the moon dipped behind the trees, 7 wolves sunk into the pasture. Shadow left the way, silently stalking through the night. Covered in dark fur, he was practically invisible. Only his long, pale scar gave him away. Noises sniffed, eyes searched, ears listened. Then the clump of grass began rustling. "There," whispered Shadow. "The calf is hiding in the tall grass." "Something feels wrong to me, Shadow," said a female voice. "This is too easy." "I made the decision, Bobs," snapped the wolf leader. "Slash, lurk, fan, circle around and wait for my signal." 3 wolves dashed off, and when they were in position, Shadow gave the signal, and his pack closed in on the wounded cow. With each step, the grass rustled more and more until the ground seemed to be moving, and then the ground really was moving. Grass and dirt crumbled aside, and there was the robot, standing tall, pointing the rifle at the wolf leader. The pack froze. "Hello, Shadow," growled the robot. "My name is Roz. I see your scar, that is familiar. I see from your scar that you are familiar with rifles. You have been shot before. You know what will happen if I pull the trigger." Reader, you and I are well aware that our robot was not programmed for violence. Roz couldn't have pulled the trigger even if she wanted to. But she didn't want to. So she was bluffing. Of course, Shadow didn't know any of this. As far as the wolf knew, he was defeated. And so he did what wolves do when they're defeated. He lay down and cowered before the robot. For the first time anyone could recall, the wolf leader looked weak. "I do not want to hurt any wolves," Roz continued, "but if you return to this farm, I will have no choice. Now please leave and never come back." Shadow scrambled away, with his tail between his legs. Bobs was close behind him, followed by the other wolves, and soon the entire pack had disappeared into the night. So Roz seems like she has saved the farm from the wolves. We will have to see if that is the case. Hopefully so. But see you next time.